I would like to remind everyone that this meeting is being broadcast via the internet. I would also like to announce that at 2:30 this committee will conduct a public hearing as required by the federal law on the board's issuance of bonds. Because we are required to post this hearing as time certain, we will pause the committee meeting at 2:30, conduct the hearing, and then resume with the committee meetings. The first action item on the agenda is approval of the minutes for the January 23rd, 2013 Agency Operations Committee meeting. Are there any questions or corrections? If not, may I have a motion for the approval?
Second.
Motion and second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion approves. The next item, I would like to call on Dr. Alonso to introduce the topics for this meeting's reports. He will provide us some background information and introduce other presenters. These items require no action. Dr. Alonso.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today we have 3 items under the Deputy Commissioner's report. I will report on 2 of them. I will present 2 of the reports, and I will call on staff for the other report. The first item on your agenda there is our standing financial report that we present every quarter to this committee. You were all provided a copy of this report about 2 weeks ago, and I believe that Sharon has also placed a hard copy here at your places in case you need to refer to it as I go through or if you have any questions. This report that is before you today is for the period ending March 31st, 2013, and it represents 7 months of activity in the current fiscal year. Since this is a report that the committee and the board is well familiar with, as we have not changed the format in probably 2-3 years now, it's not my intent to go over the report in fine details, but certainly be available to answer any questions that you may have of me or the staff. One of the things, and we heard a report earlier at the Continuous Improvement Council where they're talking about sometimes too much data is meaningful to some people, but not to the board or to a group. And one of the things that we heard was that, or that I heard, and I kind of want to reiterate this because I've always reported this, is that this report is useful to me. I use it and have used it ever since we developed it for tracking our budget and expenditures. It's a report that comes straight from our accounting records. It gives us an accurate and, I believe, a very transparent status of our financials. I will just cover a couple of items that I feel that or that I think are important. Number one, as I said, this represents 7 months of expenditures or activity in the current fiscal year, and I'd like to report that we are on schedule to meet and spend our budget as we proposed it back in July of last year. Other than that, I will be glad to respond to any specific questions that anybody might have. Mr. Chairman, it is our standard report.
Thank you, Dr. Alonso. Any questions of Dr. Alonso? If not, will you move on to this next item? Continuous improvement.
I had one question, and it's pretty simple. When I just, among the different budget adjustments or reclassifications, there was one of the larger ones, at least by percentage as well as dollars, was the tobacco funds that jumped from an original budget of about 8.1 and had about 6.7 million added to it. Just kind of curious how.
What page is that, Fred?
Page 9 of 14.
Nine?
I think it's the first.
Page 9 of 14. Of the handouts that we were sent, yeah. Towards the top of, under summary uses of revenue.
The $6.6 million?
Yeah, yeah. Curious the source or reason for the large positive adjustment.
I will call either Susan Corrine or Dan may be able to give us the specifics on that. Well, I'll look for it. One of the things, Fred, and this doesn't answer your question, but as you recall, one of the things that we do provide on a quarterly basis is we provide all adjustments in detail with an explanation. So the report prior to that will probably have it, but perhaps Susan can quickly tell us what it is while I try to find it on here.
Deputy Commissioner for Business Support Services. Susan Corrine, I'm the Deputy Assistant Commissioner for Business and Support Services.
Susan, it's on?
It is on.
Okay.
A little closer, maybe? Sorry. I'd reiterate what Dr. Alonso also said. We do include a report of detail of every budget adjustment that's ever been done since the time that you approved this budget. In this case, this budget was approved last April. But in short, the adjustment that you're looking at was our UB authority from 12 to 13.
So the 6.7, that was UB funds. It wasn't serendipity, more manna falling from heaven.
There's several adjustments. One was about $3 million. That was the UB. And then we also make cash adjustments because those funds are estimated on the tobacco funds, but we can actually spend the actual, so we'll make those adjustments as well.
So a little less than half was UB'd and the rest was just more than anticipated.
That's what it appears from the adjustment.
Thank you.
Thanks, Susan.
Thank you, Susan. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, the second item in the Deputy Commissioner's report excuse me, is an update on our continuous improvement / lean initiatives. I'm pleased to report that we are moving rapidly to implement this very important initiative. I don't need to remind you how important that is to us, to the agency, to the leadership of the agency, and to me personally. I'm pleased to announce that we continue to garner full cooperation from staff across the agency. I have no doubts that this effort will yield very good benefits for us and for higher ed as a whole, and make us better stewards of the public trust. At this time, I'd like to call on Elaine Lang, Director of Continuous Improvement, to provide the update and to respond to any questions. Elaine?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, and good afternoon, members of the committee. So where are we on this journey? Sharon, we're ready for the first slide here. It is important to remember that embedding lean within an organization is a journey. It is a series of steps where we're really taking a formal performance improvement system and making it part of our day-to-day work. We're engaging the CB staff in the work that they do every day, soliciting their solutions to the problems that they're encountering. And my job, as well as my colleague Debbie Whitus, is to support them at each phase of this process. As of today, we've had 25 CB employees participate in lean events. So where did it look like when we first started? I love this quote. It was so candid. It was at the end of one of our second events where the person said, I was dreading. I didn't know what this was all about. Lean is a foreign concept. But the end was the person was completely engaged, not only in what she did for work, but others who were there to support her in making changes to the work. So I would just like to say it is the first few lean events, as Mr. Heldenfels can probably tell you, are learning experiences for everybody. And so they were very rich learning experiences. It was important that we conducted 3 of them before the legislative session because we did not want to take anyone's time and attention away from responding to legislative questions. And the other part of this was also communicating what's happening with Lean throughout the agency through our Lean e-newsletter. So the first one, the archiving board agendas. As you know, we have to retain these records for the life of the agency, subject to many regulations. And there is a centralized, searchable, web-based system that we could use to get all of these electronic and hard copy documents into the system. And as we have used this enterprise content management system, we have found that it's a best practice in places like Minnesota, Colorado, and other places as well. So where are we and what does this look like? So right now, all of our administrative assistants in each of the divisions in the Commissioner's office have the ability to go to this website, type in a word such as regional plan, and within seconds, all of the documents related to regional plans, whether they're agendas or minutes board presentations or reports come up and can be linked, immediately clicked and seen. I didn't think you needed to see any more details, but I wanted you to get a picture of all of the volume of work that had to go into putting into this lean event into execution. So where are we today? Right now, almost 30,000 pages, probably as of today, way more than 30,000 pages of documents, whether they're electronic or hard copy, have been scanned. When I was here in January, I was letting you know that our critical goal was to get everything from what I call the recent past into the system. For me, recent past is 2003 to present. And we've exceeded that. We have everything from 1998 to the present in this electronic system. And you can also see that things back from 1966 to 1970, we actually have things even before then, the agency's origins are now stored electronically. Previously, they were just hard copy. So I want to just commend a couple of people in particular. This is a person who never likes to be singled out, but Mary Kay DeYoung in the Commissioner's Office has persistently, every single week, goes through scanning, sorting, and getting these materials into the archive. My colleague Debbie White has found a way for us to very simply get thousands of pages of electronic documents into this system within hours, tens of hours. And the other part I want to say is just the whole goal of this is to reduce the amount of time that it takes us to find information to answer requests. We wanted our process time to go from 1 hour down to 5 to 10 minutes. And so you can see that we're working in that direction. Very quickly, as I know we have a time-sensitive issue here, the loan repayment programs was our second lean event. This is where I can tell you this was a learning experience for me. I came in with certain ideas in mind. I'm sure we can use certain parts of our system to streamline the process. And in fact, there were really some significant challenges to deploying those solutions. However, the staff that were doing the work when we were going through our lean event that day identified a couple of other small areas where we could streamline thousands of transactions. There are 6,000 applications that come into the loan repayment program. And so in this case, it was the scanning and indexing phase with the circle around it. That has been reduced so that there's only one data entry point. And not only is it done for the largest program, the Teach for Texas applications, but it's also been done for physicians education and the Border County Faculty Doctoral Education Program. So the third lean event was archiving the human resources personnel files. In January, when I was with you, we had done one. We had archived one file. And I need to commend the HR staff because while they have been implementing the human resources information system, they have also been consistently, persistently archiving the current employees who have been leaving the agency. So you can see that we have, actually as of today, it's probably more than 1,000 files. And you have to remember that these are individuals who have been with the agency for 10, 20, 30 years or longer. So they have very large personnel files. And again, our time here was to reduce their retrieval time from 30 minutes down to 1 to 5 minutes. The degree program approval event took place in December. There are specific degree programs that have to go through a particular vetting process. Doctoral programs, engineering, bachelor's and master's that exceed $2 million over 5 years. The preliminary authority phase of degree program approval was Dr. Gardner provided the leadership on this, and this is also part of the Sunset Bill, and his leadership has been instrumental in streamlining this phase of the process. I can report to you that the War Division, under the leadership of Dr. Stacy Silverman, the Interim Assistant Commissioner, has already implemented the communication systems with the institutions of higher education. They've established their response time and their turnaround time. There's one more event that we did, and that was the rule routing process. As our general counsel told us, an agency's ability to enact rules is a unique responsibility and a critical responsibility. Because this was the beginning of the legislative session, we did not want to take a whole day. So we took 3 afternoons, brought a team together. Believe it or not, we had not really carved out what was the lead time for routing rules within the agency. We now have the lead time. It's 20 days to get it through all of the critical areas. Every person has a turnaround time. We have a calendar established for all of the rules. And most importantly, the staff that has been part of this lean event has established a tracking system and can tell you right now how quickly rules get routed through the system. So there has been very sincere, dedicated efforts by CB staff to embrace lean. We're in the beginning of this journey. There's much more to do, much more to go. But I welcome your feedback and comments on where we are at this point in the journey. Thank you.
Thanks. Dr. Alonso, the next report is the compliance monitoring report.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The final item under this section of the Deputy Commissioner's report is a report on the compliance monitoring. I have David Mahoney and Melissa Rhodes here available to answer any questions if you have any detailed questions, but otherwise I will give you a quick summary of where we are and where we're going for the rest of the year. The compliance staff completed the field work on 2 formula funding reviews from the annual that was established during the annual review plan that we discussed with you in January. Those 2 reviews were conducted, one at Austin Community College and the other one at Palo Alto in San Antonio at the Alamo colleges. Compliance staff is meeting with the program staff here at the coordinating board to go over the preliminary issues that we noted on those reviews. Prior to completing the final review report, we plan to have the same vetting, the same review as we do with internal audits, obviously reviewed with the commissioner and senior leadership prior to issuing the reports to the institution. So the results of those 2 reviews will be presented to this committee at the July meeting of the Agency Operations Committee. Compliance staff is also performing the preliminary planning for the next formula funding review, which will be at Brazosport College, and I believe we have that one scheduled for sometime in June or July. For next week? Okay, I'm sorry. It's coming up next week. The other item that we're working on is we're currently performing the preliminary planning on the compliance monitoring risk assessment for the 2014 plan. As some of you have seen or has been reported to you, the sunset bill that is currently being considered both by the House and the Senate has a provision that establishes this compliance monitoring for the coordinating board. And in fact, both versions have a very prescriptive provision on establishing compliance. So they talk about making sure that it's risk-based. They go on and talk about the risk elements. And so we're incorporating all of that and making sure that when we come with the next plan for 2014, that we have a good mix of public and private institutions, varying sizes and complexities, and that that the work that we do truly represents what the Sunset Commission had in mind. We've also received responses to our inventory questionnaires from the various departments here within the coordinating board, and we're prioritizing our monitoring work and identifying any gaps that may exist in compliance monitoring of existing programs to make sure that we've already had, before we established this division or this department, several efforts, especially in the federal funds, because that's required by federal statutes and OMB circulars. So we want to make sure that we capture all of that and that we incorporate that into our plan. So as you recall, Mr. Chairman and members, we presented the monitoring plan for the rest of FY12 at the January meeting, at the last meeting of this committee. And as of now, I am pleased to report that we are on track to executing the plan and reporting to you as planned. So, Mr. Chairman, that concludes the Deputy Commissioner's report. I'll be glad to answer any questions on any of the 3 reports that I presented. None of those are action items. They're all for reporting purposes only.
Thank you, Dr. Alonso. Any questions? Okay, if not, we're going to move on. We're going to skip agenda item 4A and move on to agenda item 4B. which is a consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee to issue a request for qualification or RFQ for selection of a bond tax program legal counsel to perform legal services for the agency. And I think Mr. Friends is here to expand on that. Please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. This is our biannual request for approval to issue an RFQ so that we may obtain the services of bond and tax counsel to assist the agency with legal advice regarding refinancings, bonds with new money, etc. And that's as simple as it is. We do this every 2 years pursuant to the Attorney General's rules. The Attorney General sets a 2-year maximum on any given contract for bond and tax counsel, you can sometimes exceed it, but it has to be very serious exceptions, and we've blessedly never encountered that.
Move to approve.
Second.
Motion made, second. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion approves. Next item is item 4C, is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to a proposed amendments to Chapter 1 Agency Administration, Subchapter A, Section 1.16 of Board Rules concerning general provisions. And again, Bill?
Yes, sir. This is, as it appears, some cleanup as well as 1 or 2 substantive provisions to Rule 1.16, which of course is the rule regarding contracts for materials, for goods and services to be entered into by the agency. Part of the cleanup is simply slotting Dr. Alonzo's name, or not name, but title incorrectly. The amendments further provide that the Commissioner's quarterly reports concerning all contracts that have been executed cover only those that were done with delegated authority and not reiterate contracts already approved by a board committee or the full board itself. There's another one where Dr. Alonzo will now have authority to sign off on contracts for the purchase of materials or services with a value over $100,000. So he would be a signatory available to staff in addition to the Commissioner, of course. And the final change, I believe, is in subsection H, which again reiterates that contracts having a value greater than $100,000 must be approved by a majority of the chair, the vice chair, and the chair of the responsible board committee unless those contracts have been approved by a board committee or the full board. That sums it up.
Thank you, Bill.
Yes, sir.
May I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, just a point of clarification, Bill, which I think is important. Those contracts that this will grant me the delegation over $100,000 are those contracts where the board has no discretion, and the Commissioner is authorized already to sign those. This just simply extends it to the Deputy Commissioner for Finance.
Correct.
I just want to make sure that it's not all contracts for over $100,000, and that's clearly spelled out in there.
I have a comment and a question. This amount of $100,000 and $5,000, when was it decided? 1 year ago, 5 years ago, or 10 years ago? Can that be raised to maybe $10,000 and $150,000 in the light of the efficiency that we are talking about?
The rule was in place when I got here in 2007. It's been amended a couple of times, so it's been about 6 or 7 years now, Durga.
Is there an inconvenience with that, or is that working well?
The one for under $5,000, it works well because I mean that's the amount that the Commissioner can delegate down to the assistant commissioners, and.
Can we change that to $10,000 and $100,000 can be raised to $150,000 maybe? That way it will make us more efficient.
I know that staff conducted a study, I want to say late 2006, early 2007, that reflected that approximately 75% of the contracts fell at $5,000 or below. But if the board wishes to raise these levels, it's certainly within the discretion of the board to do so. We could not do that at this meeting, but we could certainly do it at a future meeting.
Okay, well, we can consider that in the future.
Yeah, I'd like to see some study done. What is the new number of contracts, 75% or 80%, or has gone down to 50%? And same
At the $10,000 level?
Yes.
All right, sir.
$5,000 level.
And feel free to come back to the committee if you need to make adjustments. Okay. Do I have a motion as presented? Second. Any further discussions? If not, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion approved. We're going to skip and go back to agenda item 4A at this time. Agenda item 4A is public hearing with respect to the issuance of one or more series of State of Texas college student loan refunding bonds to be issued by the board in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $115 million. We are now commencing a public hearing with respect to the issuance of one or more series of State of Texas college student loan refunding bonds to be issued by the board in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $115 million. This hearing concerns the issuance of college student loan refunding bonds for the board's student loan program. Federal tax law requires that prior to issuing such bonds, a public hearing be held for the purpose of discussing the bonds and the use of the proceeds thereof. Notice of the public hearing was published in several newspapers across the state. I will now open the public hearing with respect to the issuance by the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board of the State of Texas college student loan refunding bonds in an aggregate principal amount not to exceed $115 million in one or more series for the purposes set forth in the published notice. The notice of public hearing that was published in 10 newspapers throughout the state of Texas, state and in the Texas Register, encouraged interested parties to contact the agency in writing or by telephone prior to the hearing. We received no notification from interested parties. Also, we did not have anybody sign in prior to the meeting. Does anyone here wish to speak against the issuance of bonds? Does anyone here wish to speak in favor of the issuance? All parties having been given an opportunity to speak, I now declare the public hearing closed. That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Sure. Well, you coached me well then. I don't know. We're just talking about measly $115 million. Okay, with that, we're going to move on to item 4D now. Am I correct, Dr. Alonzo?
That's correct.
Agenda item 4D is consideration of adopting the Commissioner's recommendation to the committee relating to the proposed amendments to Chapter 1, Agency Administration, Subchapter E, Section 1.115 of Board Rules concerning student complaint procedure. And we have Bill Friends here on that, Jeff.
Thank you, sir. This is a proposed rule modification. Sharon Josman is handing out a summary. The blue page, actually in this case the light yellow page, has changed because we received two comments, one from the University of Texas at Austin and the other from the University of North Texas System in the last several days. And the comments, well, first let me describe the change, proposed change. At this point, the agency refers any student complaint concerning an institution within a system to the system for final resolution. The agency no longer is involved once that referral is made, other than perhaps to check on the progress and the outcome. But it has no decision-making authority with regard to any of those complaints that might be referred. The proposed change as posted was to change the word shall refer to may refer, simply to give the agency a certain amount of discretion in making those types of referrals. And the University of Texas at Austin expressed concern that the rule as modified could be ambiguous or create confusion. For that reason, it indicated it would be just fine if it stayed the way it was, or in the alternative, to amend the rule to require that an institution or a system that is involved as the subject of a complaint receive timely notice of the complaint and be allowed to provide input. Staff agreed, after reviewing the rules, that the appropriate university system should be provided notice and, of course, be given an opportunity for input into any particular complaint if it was not referred to the institution or to the system. The only exception, and in Section 61.031 of the Texas Education Code, there's a reference to us, the agency, performing an undercover investigation. So that's the only exception that we built in crafting language to meet UT's recommended alternative. Other than that, we're proposing that we accept UT's recommended alternative so that it would be given notice of a student complaint that was not referred, and of course be provided the opportunity for input, either on its own or through a component institution in the system. So we, as far as I'm aware, met UT's request. The other comment that we received was from the University of North Texas, and it essentially asserted that the coordinating board does not have, in its view, statutory authority to investigate and resolve student complaints filed by UNT system students. Staff respectfully disagrees with UNT's position and points out in the pages just handed to you that, one, the United States Department of Education has indicated that the coordinating board or a designated state agency for this purpose should have exactly the type of authority that we're talking about. And in regards to the coordinating board itself, as you may recall, about a year and a half ago, we sought and obtained an opinion from the Attorney General providing that the coordinating board, based on its statutory authority in Section 61.031 of the Texas Education Code, does have authority to investigate, handle, and resolve complaints. And so that was essentially our response to the University of North Texas comment. And so we're not proposing additional modifications to the rules as a result of that comment. And that would conclude my report. Yes, sir.
Do I have a motion? Second. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Motion approves.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move to auditing. Agenda item 5A is discussion of standard number 114, auditors' communication with those charged with governance. This item is a reporting item only and does not require committee action. Susan Warren, senior partner with the firm of KPMG, is here to present this item. And I now call on Susan and ask her to introduce any other staff member that may be with her today. Thank you, Susan. Come and welcome.
Thank you. I have with me, is it on? I have with my Rebecca Goldstein. Rebecca Goldstein is with me today also. She's a manager on the account. like to work through our presentation that you have in front of us.
Sure.
This is the planning presentation that we make each year as we start the financial statement audit, and it is the audit for August 31st, 2012. The first slide, you'll see the agenda. We'll walk through the team, the objectives, responsibilities, the scope of the engagement. And number 6 notes new pronouncements, which it says none, which means there's no new changes in the authoritative language that we have to implement this year. So in essence, the statements and the footnotes will look the same as they have in the prior years. Moving to the client service team, the key takeaway from this slide is all the names on this slide are the same as they were last year. You have myself as the audit partner. Dee Niles is our second partner who looks from a quality control perspective. Rebecca and Phil are the audit managers. We have Deborah Cook as a tax manager in case we have a tax issue that comes up. Even though you are tax exempt, there are still certain tax requirements you have to follow. So she takes a high-level look at that. And, of course, we have our minority firm assistants, and then internal audit does provide assistance on this engagement as well. The objective of the audit hasn't changed, but just as a reminder, you've hired us to put an opinion on the financial statements that were prepared by your team with your oversight to make sure they've been presented in a fairly in all material respects to all the required accounting standards. We do that by planning and performing to provide a reasonable but not absolute assurance. That's why I like to say is we can't look at every single transaction that comes through the agency. Our approach is risk-based. We test controls. We look at risk. We look at the higher volume numbers as well as the non-routine transactions. And so that's why it says reasonable but not absolute. And we also do test controls over the financial reporting process. So basically, how is cash recorded, coming in and coming out? How are the accruals booked at year end? What are those controls over all those numbers, if you will, that go into the financial statements? So we do look at that as part of the audit. From a responsibilities perspective, the responsibilities and the standards are split between management and the auditor. So here's a list of what your management team does for you on your behalf. They are the ones who choose the accounting policies and implement them. They take those policies and prepare the financial statements in accordance with all those regulations. They do establish the internal control over financial reporting that we just discussed. And, of course, they have to do all that within all the laws and regulations of the coordinating board in the state. And then when they're finished with all that, they make that all available to us to do our audit. And then at the end of the engagement, there's a letter called a representation letter, which we do give you a copy of that when we come back to present the results that they sign on behalf. And the two things we like to point out in there is it does basically say they've told us about any significant deficiencies in controls. In other words, were there any control failures during the year? You are required to tell us that. And they also have to acknowledge their responsibility for controls over fraud. So those are things that your management team will sign and represent back to us at the end of the engagement. As far as the responsibilities of the Committee on Agency Operations is you basically oversee that process. And then jointly with management, you help put those controls in place and you help set the proper tone at the top for making the culture of honesty and high ethical standards. Moving to what you have hired us to do, you do, on the next slide, you do form the opinion we just mentioned. We do that. And then we do that by looking at controls I mentioned over the financial statement reporting process. Two specific things that the standards require for us to look at from a control perspective is material misstatement due to fraud. And I'll elaborate on that in a slide just in a few minutes. And then also risk of management overriding controls, which I will also elaborate on. We are required to write back to you in writing if there are any significant deficiencies or material weakness in controls. So if we find any problems with controls, we are actually required to put that in writing back to you at the end of the engagement. The last bullets talk about all the professional standards we have to follow, and then the required communication, which is the results of the audit, which we present to you at the July meeting. Questions on any of the responsibilities? Hearing none, this is just a diagram of the KPMG audit approach and methodology. If you start at the 1 o'clock hour, it kind of moves that way. Basically, we start with the audit planning, which involves management, internal audit. We move around, we implement our procedures. We have control procedures in place, which I mentioned, the tax reviewer, the quality control reviewer, an IT manager. And then, of course, we work at the top. If we need tax, we also bring them into the engagement. But this is just a graphic of how that top-down risk-based approach audit process works. The actual scope of the audit is the 2012 financial statements. There it lists all the required standards that we follow. The management letter is how we would actually communicate those deficiencies and controls if we had any. That's why it says if applicable. If we had that, that's what the document you would get. And then the SAS 114 communication is twofold, the presentation for the day and the presentation in July. Materiality in an audit, just to kind of tell you what that is it is professional judgment at the end of the day, and it's both qualitative and quantitative. KPMG has 4 or 5 different materiality numbers. It's not just one number. We kind of have a very top one that I call the don't pass go number, and then we have various ones down below that kind of help us judge whether we need to do more audit work or less audit work or whether we can pass. But that's all professional standards. Those numbers change every year. There's a lot of professional skepticism that goes into that, and it does drive the nature, timing, extent of our audit procedures. For example, one of those numbers is used to run our sampling methodology, so that then drives how big our samples are or how small our samples are. The layman's term for materiality is if something was wrong in a financial statement, would the user of the financials make the incorrect decision? And so that's what we always try to keep in the back of our minds when we're setting those thresholds and making our audit or judgment is how big would something have to be wrong for somebody to basically use that information and make a wrong choice? Questions there? Okay. Then the deliverables and timeline on the next slide just kind of tells you the whole timeline of the audit. February to April is our planning, which we're concluding with this meeting. I've also started the IT work on the IT systems. That moves from IT work, we moved into all our substantive procedures, our vouching, our ticketing and tying, our looking at sample sizes. And then we do conclude at the end with a presentation back to the July meeting with the financial statements. As I mentioned a little bit more on fraud, the standards on fraud talk about identification of fraud and then how we have to respond to that. So what we have to do is identify fraud risk in our financial statements. We start by having internal conversations with our own team, and those are going to be things that if we have to think about it from a perspective of if an employee of the coordinating board wanted to do something improper, create a fraudulent transaction, where do we think, based on our knowledge of you, they would try to do that? And then we go talk to management about the controls you have in place, whether they're preventive or detective around those things. And we also talk to management about, we ask them that same question. We ask management, where do you think your employee might try to do something wrong? And usually it's someplace you've already brainstormed about yourself and you put controls in place. And so that's part of that conversation. And so once we get all that documented, we are required down in the response section to actually test those controls. So as your management team has told us, this is what we do to prevent X from happening, we actually go pick some transactions and make sure that control was operating as it was designed to basically make sure that anti-fraud control is functioning. We do specifically look at management override of controls. It's great to have controls in place, but if your executive team at the top circumvents those controls, they don't do you any good. So we do ask questions of people about how they feel about the environment. Do they think it's an open door environment? What's the tone at the top? Have they ever been asked to do something they don't feel comfortable doing? Things like that. So we do, and we ask quite a few people in the agency those questions to help us get our hands around that. And then the unpredictability element, there's always something new we test every year. We may lower some of those thresholds I talked about. We may pick a different account. That to you might be a few $1,000s, but it's an account where I just want to see what's in it. And so there's always some unpredictability. And the reason for that is if your management team knows what we're going to test year in and year out, it makes it a lot easier for them to put a transaction somewhere else if they know we're not going to look at it. So I think the team will attest to you that we're always looking at something different for that very reason. If for some reason we found fraud, we would talk to the commissioner and we would bring it to the board's attention during that. We wouldn't wait till July. But if we find that, we would let you know as soon as we knew about it. Questions on our fraud approach? Hearing none, the next slide is just a reminder of what a material weakness and a significant deficiency are. These are the control issues that if we did find, we'd put in writing back to you in that management letter. In essence, they're qualitative and quantitative factors. The takeaway from here is that the reasonable possibility phrase, in other words, something doesn't have to go wrong to have a control failure. It really is the idea of, so could something go wrong? And so that's how we look at it from a control perspective, is could something have gone wrong here? If the answer to that question is yes, then we decide whether it's a significant deficiency or material weakness. The difference between the two is really auditor judgment at the end of the day. It depends upon the facts and circumstances, what we're talking about, how many transactions run through that process, all kinds of different things that go into that process. here's a diagram of kind of the significant areas of the audit. Starting at the left, we do look at the valuation and existence of your student loans. We also look at your debt and your debt covenants. We'll look at your appropriations and your grant revenues and the related receivable balances. And of course, we look at the financial assistance expenses and those related payable balances at year end. Those are the primary streams of the entity, and we spend a lot of time auditing those. We do look at the significant estimate, which is the allowance. It's a methodology where you come up each year with the amount of you need to reserve for the loans that you don't think the students are going to pay for. So we do take a look at that. As I already mentioned, there's no new accounting standards. And on the far right, IT, those are the systems there that we actually spend time working at. We look at general controls, which is access and change management, batch operations. And then we also look at specific application controls within those systems to make sure the checks and balances, the edits, whatever it is, are working correctly. So it's Helms, MIP, CRS, and BMS, where we spend some IT time. This last slide is the slide where I get to ask some questions to you. And so the first one is, if we were to have a problem during the audit, what we've done in the past is the committee chair is the person that the commissioner and I would start with and having a conversation. I just want to make sure that that's the proper protocol you'd like us to follow.
We'll open that up for the discussion.
Unless there's any burning desire to change the system, that has always worked well historically.
It has. And the idea is just to have a process in place in case something happens. Not that I'm anticipating something happening, just make that clear. But the standards do require us to have this conversation up front. Okay. The second question is, as far as allocations of responsibilities between management and the committee, has anything changed there? In other words, have you taken back some authority or given more authority during fiscal year 12? I know we're already in 13, so I'm talking about 12. But I just need to know if any of that's changed, because that changes the way we look at controls.
Can't think of it right off the bat, no.
Structure is the same. Responsibilities are the same.
Okay. Significant changes to you as far as the strategies of the entity? So new business areas you're getting into, I mean, I'm not aware of any, but I'm still required to ask. Are you doing something that's different than what you would have done in the past?
We thought about starting a yogurt shop, but...
That's exactly what I would need to know about.
But I was ready to start that.
Okay.
Bobby took the idea.
Well,
all right.
Susan, let me interrupt you for just a second here.
Yes.
As you're going through these items, do you see, if any one of these items that you see that we should be looking at it, please do say something on it.
I will. Thank you. The next one is particular areas of warrants of special attention. The way I like to phrase that one is if you think back to the items where you might have spent significant time having discussions at the board or making significant decisions. I know bonds is one, and we definitely do look at bonds, but things like that where you've had a significant emphasis during the year, where we would can't read about it in the minutes or it's not part of your daily operations that we would need to know about. No? Okay. Communications from the regulators, like IRS or Department of Ed or anybody like that you've had to deal with? No? Okay. Any concerns about internal controls at the agency? Any knowledge that you might have of deficiencies or problems that you would like us to address?
The only thing that would come to mind would be we need to make sure, and at least that's, my thought process, is we should have as much transparency as we can.
Sir.
We are an oversight agency that, oversees all these institutions in the state of Texas, and we need to make sure that our house itself is in order.
Transparency. Noted. And then the last bullet is kind of a catch-all, just as a memory jogger, but any developments in reporting, laws, governance, things like that you've had to deliberate on in fiscal year 12 that we would need to know about.
Can't think of it.
Okay. And then the very last slide is just a reminder that we do use internal audit. They provide us 50 hours of staff, which reduces the cost to you. And so they are part of our team, and they actually have completed their work for fiscal year 12. That concludes our prepared remarks, if there's any questions.
Any question of Ms. Warren? If not, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Okay. All right. The next item is item 5B, State of Texas Federal Portion of Statewide Single Audit Report for the fiscal year ended August 31st, 2012. Report number 13-322 and report number 13-555 issued March 4, 2013 by the State Auditor's Office. This team is reporting. This item is a reporting item only and does not require committee action. KPMG is under contract to conduct this portion of the audit on our federal funds on behalf of the State Auditor's Office. Ms. Warren was the lead on this audit, and she is already at the presenter's table, so please proceed.
Yes. There were, as far as the coordinating board goes, there were 2 findings in that report. And this is the report where we look at your federal funds on behalf of Mr. Keel's office, and it gets submitted to the federal government for the state as a whole. It's a statewide consolidation report. But there were 2 findings in the report specifically under the coordinating board's name. And both of these were related to IT. The takeaway here is that, as you're well aware, the state has changed from IBM to Xerox, and that occurred during fiscal year 12. Most of the year was IBM, and then Xerox took over mid-year, and of course they're in place for 13. These are what we refer to as carryover findings. In other words, there was issues with the IBM system, and they were there in fiscal year 11, and they continued into 12. And because of the transition, obviously IBM didn't take the time to correct them, and Xerox came in place and hasn't had time to fix them yet by the time 12 was over. So from a federal perspective, we literally had to tell the government that these 2011 issues continued. The findings talk about the transition from IBM to Xerox and how it's moving forward. And so they're there. They're both significant deficiencies. They're not material weaknesses. And that the threshold of standards is much lower in a federal audit. So these don't, at a financial statement level, cause any harm at the financial statement. These are literally at the grant level in a single audit. So it's very much lower threshold, which is why they come up to the level of a significant deficiency. The takeaway I would give you is that these should clear themselves in 13 because Xerox would have been there for a full year.
Okay. Any questions of Ms. Watt? If not, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Susan.
With that, we're going to move to item 5C, Texas Guaranteed Student Loan Corporation Program Review Report, THCB's Administration of the Federal Family Education Loan Program. This item is the reporting item only and does not require committee action. And Mark Holy, our Director of Internal Audit, will present this item. Mark, go for it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members. Agenda item 5C is a no action required item. I'm bringing to you the report from the auditors that were here with TG. And if you recall, back at the October meeting, this particular review was structured as a joint review between the Federal Department of Education auditors and the TG audit staff. So in October, we presented the federal auditor's report, which was a no findings report. This particular scope was of the FFELP loan program within the agency. So the report that you have before you today is TG's report, and I'd like to say a few words about their report. I would call your attention to their conclusion within the transmittal letter that's at the beginning of the report. In particular, they discussed the fact that they considered the coordinating board to have worked closely with the audit staff, and there are 10 findings in the report. TG considers those findings to have been resolved, as noted in their transmittal letter, based on the corrective actions that were implemented as they came up during the audit process. So I think that's an important takeaway from this particular report. In terms of trying to summarize the 10 issues that are contained within this report, I would say that 8 of the 10 issues are within the scope area of default claims processing due diligence. And there's one issue in particular, and it's the only issue of the 10 that had any monetary aspect to it, and that is report finding B. And in that particular issue, there was a loan that was a claim that was made. The loan turned over to TG. A few days after that, the agency received a $250 payment against that loan or on that loan, and the payment was not forwarded in a timely manner to the guarantor agency. The result was a $29.78 interest penalty, if you will, that the agency incurred as a result of that. That has been paid and corrected. The corrective action there that was put into place was a enhanced report review process to pick up or to better monitor the status of those payments that can linger or come in after the claim has been turned over to the guarantor agency. We have agency staff here, Dan Weaver and his loan program operations staff, in case there's any specific questions about the other corrective actions on any of the other items. Again, this is an informational only item that I brought to you today, and at this time I'd be happy to entertain any questions.
Yeah, I have a question of Dan. Whose bonus check will be deducted for that $29? Any questions on the subject? If not, sorry, go ahead.
So the corrective actions that you did you change procedures? Can you tell me where they are? It was what you consider the normal fallout of just mistakes?
Yes. What I would say is that for several of these, because of the audit scope, the time period, there were several issues where the corrective action had actually already occurred, but because of the time period that was being reviewed, the mechanism was not in place at that time. So when the auditors looked back that far, they found the issue, but since that time, the corrective action had been put into place. Now, there were a couple that didn't fall into that category. The one that I just mentioned to you that had the monetary aspect to it. There was another one that related to language within the collection letters, and my understanding that language was designed as sort of a catch-all language for all loan types, and yet there were some specific provisions for FFELP, and so the correction was to go back and tailor the collection letters to make sure that we included the language that was required under federal law.
So a few of these would have been human error, but most of them were procedural then?
Correct.
So then my other question is, when the audit was done, was it just, this may be in here, but I didn't see it, was it just a sampling, or do we think that there are still errors out there that we haven't corrected?
Well, the audit definitely used a sampling methodology.
So you haven't gone back into old files to see if there's other money we owe to people?
I have.
Please introduce yourself and turn on your mic.
I'm Catherine Carson. I work in the loan program, and we have reviewed all the receipts to make sure we forwarded everything. And it was just the one check for $250.
Okay.
I think Ms. Shepard's making a good point. Anytime in audit we find something like that, then you got to go back in that area and, make sure that.
So on all the corrective actions, that's what the department did?
We looked back at everything, yes.
And every file was looked at where you were using maybe a procedure that wasn't as solid as it should have been?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And the next, and I think it's the last agenda item under auditing, is item 5D, internal audit status update briefing, and Mark will take that too.
Thank you. Again, this is a no action required item. We wanted to provide you with an update on our internal audit activities. So the information you have before you, I've listed the audits that are currently in progress. There are 3 audits in progress: loan refund process, agency telecommuting practices, and then a review of college work study. And for the first item listed there, loan refund process, that particular audit has been completed. It just didn't meet the reporting cutoff for this particular meeting. It will come before you at the July AOC meeting, and that I'm pleased to report is a no findings review. The other two, telecommuting and college work study, those are in the middle of field work actually, so we'll get those completed and report those to the committee at the appropriate time. There are two engagements that still are on our audit plan for the fiscal year that are yet to be started. One is an update on sunset implementation, and the second is an audit of agency accountability measures. I've listed one investigation that is pending. It's related to Texas A&M Commerce and the administration of some international programs. This particular item has been, it was brought forth almost a year ago, back in July of 2012, and we've been working with Texas A&M System internal audit as well as A&M Commerce staff, and this is another example of one that didn't make the cutoff for this meeting. I'll be bringing the actual the formal results to the July meeting, but again, I'm pleased to report that that working with the staff from A&M System internal audit that there were no that was unable to be substantiated. There were some management issues. There were not any issues that were fraudulent or that related to our administration of the dollars that were in question here. And I'll bring those results and give you some more information on that at the July briefing. The other information that you have before you, I wanted to show you the strategic initiatives that we're working on at the present time, and that's been pretty significant at the moment because we have a number of external audits underway. You just heard from Susan Warren with their work and our participation in that audit. We've had a team here from the State Comptroller's Office performing a post-payment audit, and in addition, we've had a team come and do an entrance conference from the State Auditor's Office on an audit of performance measures for the agency. Moving on down the list, we had a couple things that are related there. You heard earlier the Dr. Alonzo's report on the compliance monitoring function. We continue in internal audit to work very closely with that function. At this time, in particular, we're working with compliance monitoring on the development of two plans that will come before you at the July meeting, the compliance monitoring and the internal audit work plans for the coming fiscal year. So we're gathering information, we're assessing risk, and we're working closely with Dr. Alonzo's staff to get that information and work through it in a systematic manner. The last two items that you see there, procedures manual and external peer review, are also related. We're hosting an external peer review team. You'll remember some discussion in previous AOC meetings regarding the selection of that team. That team is from the Institute of Internal Auditors. There's a lot of work that goes into preparing to be reviewed, and so we've been working through that process. They're actually scheduled to be here on site the week of May the 6th. We had to do a complete rewrite, major overhaul of our department procedures manual, and just a lot of other information that we've gathered and provided to the team. And I would like to commend our staff, my staff, for the work that they've done in this regard, because there's a lot of effort that went into getting prepared for this review. And once the team is here, conducts their review, then they will issue a report. That report will be provided to you at the July AOC meeting. And that concludes my presentation. I'll be happy to address any questions.
Any questions of Mark? Yes, sir. Go ahead, please.
I would just like to commend Mark and his staff. I think they've brought a very, very significant improvement to the coordinating board, and I thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, please convey that to your staff.
Thank you. I will.
Thank you. Well, that concludes the Agency Operations Committee meeting, and I will be happy to entertain a motion for adjournment.
So moved. Thank you.
All in favor, say aye. Meeting's adjourned.